everyone, I'm Hannah from IEEE PIE team. PIE is an organization of promotion of innovation and entrepreneurship. We know that most of you guys are pretty much fed up with the usual webinars and panel discussions, and that is why we bring forth to you this interview. So welcome everyone to our interview with Mr. Sridhar Radhakrishnan.
For those who don't know Mr. Sridhar, he is an engineer and he is the program director of Thanal, a trust which aims at bringing an environmental awareness to our society. So let's hear more about Thanal from Mr. Sridhar itself.
So let's start with this interview. My first question to you is, an engineer, lecturer, environmentalist. All three doesn't really have anything in common. But what was the force that you drove to be an environmentalist?
Very interesting. See, first of all, an engineer generally doesn't become a lecturer nowadays. I mean, an engineer does things. And there is a famous saying that if you know, you do. If you don't know, you teach. It's a very questionable quote, but it's a very common quote. And in terms of moving from an engineering, what I learned, I did my computer science and engineering from the College of Engineering, Trivandrum. In fact, Trivandrum Engineering College is one of the prestigious institutions. And it's interestingly on its 80th year or 81st year, I think, and being a very proud alumni. I must say that the college also did some terrific amount of molding for people like us, because we grew up in an environment which is unlike kids grow nowadays with such a huge burden of debt and all that. You have to pay through, you have to take loans to study and all that. So we had nothing like that. So we were always free to see, learn, understand, interact, play politics around as well in the college. And then we moved on to take up jobs when we finished our course. And there also, the same questions come up, because when you're in a job, you are always in a challenge. And one of the biggest worries that I've had in my life, at least, was that I just couldn't take, the very facet of engineering is the rigor in it, is the quality of, work that one has to do. And we always found that our own breed of people, engineers themselves and others, revel more on compromises and sometimes even corruption. So justice was something which always hit me on my face. If there was injustice, I just couldn't take it. So there was always responses or reactions, and how long we can go on with that. And then at some point, interestingly, I also met a group of environmentalists who were working deeply on the issue of nature and environment and forests and mangroves and plastics issues and pesticides and all that. And then suddenly you realize, after a few levels of discussions and interactions with them, conversations with them, you realize that the whole question of justice is much more deeper, stronger, and more challenging in the field and world of environment, without which human beings, no animals, our engineers don't survive at all. So the big challenge was that injustice was being faced more by the environment than by human beings. We had to do something desperately to correct that situation. And the biggest crime on the environment was being done by us as human beings. So that probably, challenged me in some sense. So I shifted, and I overnight sort of, I didn't wait for a few days to think about it. I just sort of overnight resigned and walked into the to do some research work initially on the environment, and then a lot of activism. So it was a combination of research, field work, activism, lots of conversations with lots of people, and eventually action, and building up institutions which could help or help correct environmental wrongs, or work on environmental justice and environmental health. That's what I generally call myself. I work on environmental justice and environmental health. So that I think should be the answer for your question. Yeah.
That was truly inspiring, sir, which actually brings me to my next question. An idea can change your life. It's a cliche caption for the word idea. Coming to you, how did you get the idea and the strategy while building your work in Tunnel Trust and other programs?
See, Thanal was a collective which is already there. It started in 1986, and I quit my job in 1997, and walked into the institute, into that kind of work. So Thanal was already there, and it was working very deeply on environment. And it was more founded on the work on looking at natural history, and largely working with the kids, with the youngsters, with schools and colleges on nature education and all that. So when a few of us, that time youngsters, moved into the institution in 1997, joined hands with people we already knew, and there were a few others also, and we sort of reformed the organization collectively into more of an activistic organization, and not only just doing what we call bare environmentalism. We are not on the grounds doing strikes and pulling down the industries and all that, but we did a lot of research, and our work was founded on what we would call demand-led research. Where we go to a community, we realize that there is a serious environmental problem which is probably hurting their health and livelihood, like the endosulfan, pesticide issue in the Kasaragod, where we were very seriously involved in their work. From there, we understand things. We do a lot of work, research, and then we help the community understand the crisis, and then try and rectify it and work towards. And the rectification process is the biggest challenge, because people think that rectification is just a technological work. It is not. It has to involve not just the research that I was talking about, but lots of community work. At the same time, it also has to involve working with the government, because sometimes government will say, no, endosulfan is not a problem. It said at that time. It took such a long effort to get them to correct the situation, correct their understanding. That we had to go to courts on this. We had to, go to the government on this. We had to also go to the streets on this. We did street shows. We had to do struggles and strikes and all that. So these are all part of the same kind of work. So it's not like you build a social enterprise. You have a whole set of things to do to actually make the change. And so coming to your question of ideas and strategies, I'll tell you something. Ideas are not, and this is very, very something that I've learned over time. Ideas are not something that are intellectual property rights. It doesn't come from my head or somebody else's head. It's a collective outcome. It's not just a collective outcome of a few people sitting together, or let's say a collective. It's also a collective. It's also an outcome of which is like transcends centuries. So if I am talking to you and if I am thinking about something, it is also because there's been so much of such kind of thoughts over thousands of years of humanity, and maybe even other animals. We have come from somewhere. We have evolved over time, and I carry the genetics and also the thoughts of a number of our earlier generations. So ideas are not property rights. Ideas and strategies are collective thinkings. It's an outcome of collective thinking. So in Thanal, and whether it be in Thanal or in all our interactions, we ensure that this collective thinking is given its due. We find space for that. And we also seriously understand that we are not owners of these ideas. We hate the whole idea of intellectual property rights, because whether it be a song or whether it be an idea, it is thousands of years old. It's just come to us. We have evolved through it. See, the work in environment itself, it's also as I said, the whole question of collectiveness, but the work in environment itself is sort of a survival. The work in environment itself is a sort of a quest for survival. At this point, you understand that very well, because you are hit by a COVID, you are hit by continuous, floods and rains. If you look at any part of the world, we are really, really facing a huge environmental deluge. Now, that quest for survival itself is actually a collective challenge. It is not that one prime minister or one person can solve this problem. It's a huge collective exercise where all of us need to come together. Everybody needs to play its role. And hence, to the question of ideas itself, it has to be collective. The ideas have to come collectively. Obviously, individuals can bring up ideas, but even for operating it, it has to become very collective ideas, and strategies have to be collectively done. And that is why the world has to come together on this question. And engineers have a huge role to play in this. And that is something which I will, sort of explain at some other point of time. But engineers have a huge role in it. Yeah.
Great. I hope this insight would help the people who are watching this and searching for an idea in their life. Moving on, we have gone through projects in the digitalized era. How does this Save Our Rise project differ, or how does it transform the existing projects?
See, there is a very interesting question. I mean, people ask us sometimes, ask me at least, you are an engineer. What have you to do with rice? Or what have you to do with farming? And I mean, some more completely disconnected people will even ask, what are you doing in environment? You are an engineer. Now, let me tell you that whether we be an engineer or a doctor or a peon or whoever it be, even nobody, we eventually have to produce food to eat. We have to have food to eat. And the point is that every animal in this world, if you look at every species, there are two very critical aspects to their survival. One is they have to find the food. So eating becomes important, which is basically gaining energy. And the second is they have to procreate because they have to create the next generation. This is a very, very important, I mean, very, very, understand. I mean, this is an understanding which many of us don't really take it. We are just part of a billion species, billion, life forms across the world. We are just part of it. We are one species. It's called Homo sapiens. And we have to there are certain fundamental behaviors that we all have to have as a species, as a life form, and which is produce food, eat food. So the point is that the challenge for humanity is also to ensure that we produce enough food for the whole world, all of us together. But in our nation and in our state, Kerala, we have messed this up completely. I'll give you an example. We have 8 lakh hectares of paddy lands in Kerala. It was enough to at least feed 50% of Kerala's population. We developed, we engineered, we built, we filled up paddy lands. We had huge mansions coming in that. We have shopping complexes coming. We have airports coming in that. At the end of the day, you know what? We have 2 lakh hectares. Which is 1/4 of what we used to have, which also cut down our food security drastically. And now, when crises are hitting us, it's important that we have to have local production of food. So what is the government doing? It's having the Subiksha Kerala project, all this project. Why? Because they're saying, now come and localize food production. All of us, wherever we have 1 cent, 2 cent, produce it. Now, that is the background, one of the backgrounds in which we are talking about the Save Our Rise campaign. The second big background is that the most critical aspect of our environment is its biodiversity, which means over millions of years, lots of species have evolved, lots of varieties of food has evolved, and that's why we have such a large variety of food. It could have just been one tablet. I mean, the whether you call it God or let's evolution, they could have just finally made one tablet or one rice, but they made lakhs of it. Why? Because every environment, every ecosystem is completely different from the other or very different from the other. And so what happens? In that ecosystem, the plants have to grow. So we have biodiversity. Certain animals can live in certain environments, certain animals cannot live in certain other environments. That is the whole question of diversity and ecosystems. So these two things, see, one of the problems I have is that engineers have very little understanding of this. That's not their problem. We have not been taught at all. I mean, when I studied in college, I never learned all these things. Now I understand that that is very critical for all of us to understand and learn. And that's why, I sort of agreed to this interview also, because this is one space where I can talk to engineers at least. Now look at it like this. Ecosystems are very critical. Biodiversity is very critical. And Save Our Rise campaign plays a big role there. What? We had lakhs of species. To be precise, about at least 1.5 lakh varieties in India. Now we have a few thousands. We killed it. We destroyed all of it. We have to revive it. So the Save Our Rise campaign was basically about 3-4 things. One, revive the biodiversity or agrobiodiversity or diversity of paddy varieties, bring them back into the farmer's field. 2, Now we are doing a lot of farming with pesticides and chemicals and all that, and it's hurting us. So move them into organic farming or natural farming and all that, which is basically ecosystems based approach farming. Thirdly, even as a policy, governments are, of late, they're getting back to become interested, but they messed up agriculture. That's why we have 3 to 4 lakh farmers die in the last 10, 15 years. Have you ever bothered? I mean, imagine when engineers like us, suddenly hundreds of them suicide, what will happen? India will stop. They'll look at it. Why are engineers dying? But we had 3.5 lakh farmers die in the last 15 years. Have you been bothered about it? So even that ecosystem of farming itself has been destroyed by policy. So Save Our Rice campaign is a campaign that is trying to revive the sovereignty of food producing systems in India. We worked in about 7 states, some states intensively, some states very little, in the sense that it started off. And we could revive a large number of about 1,500 varieties back into the farmers' field. Farmers are now producing that and actually, gaining much better livelihoods and even incomes through this. We have at least 1 lakh farmers across the country now gone into sustainable farming and not dependent on, hybrid seeds and seeds which are produced in labs and all that, but more natural seeds, and also producing enough food. So Save Our Rice campaign, whether it be a digitized world or an analog world, let me tell you, whether you are an engineer or a pilot or the Prime Minister of India, eventually you have to eat to live. And if that food has to come from somewhere far away, and nowadays we discuss China, but let's not discuss China, but somewhere far away, it is not sustainable. So sustainability has to be localized. It has to be, in some sense, as autonomous as possible within the farmers, villages, and rural systems. We are talking about Atmanirbhar nowadays. And Atmanirbhar is not just about a nation becoming Atmanirbhar, but every village, as much as possible, being Atmanirbhar, and every town being Atmanirbhar. And hence, we have to revive agriculture in some more sustainable, more protective, livelihood-based way. And farmers have to thrive in that also. You cannot have farmers coming from rural to urban. We saw that, and look at when COVID lockdown happened, all of them had to go back. They are all farmers. In fact, they are agricultural refugees. They have no way of surviving in the villages. Now we'll have to get them back to the villages and ensure that they survive there in agriculture, which will also be good because they'll produce it for us. But we have to support them. So Rice campaign has basically been about bringing back food sovereignty into the rice ecosystems. We focused on rice because we were passionate about rice. Kerala is a rice country, rice state, so we were passionate about rice. But we also have friends who are working on wheat and maize and sometimes even millets. So the movement is a very large movement nationally. We are all part of it. And we are about 15 years of our work, immense work that we have done. And I said, as I said, I think whether we be engineers or digitized or non-digitized, this is critical, and we have to work towards that. Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to our next question. In this present scenario, people seem to lose their control of mind in solving problems. How did you overcome the hurdles that you had faced during the initiation of programs in Thanal Trust and other campaigns and enterprises, many that were not so familiar at the time?
Okay, so, because this is a question about thinking, basically mind and thinking and focusing and all that, let me take a few minutes to actually say what Thanal does, so you will understand that better. See, Thanal is a voluntary organization working on environment. It started in 1986. And by 1998, when we all joined, it sort of repositioned itself as an organization working intensively on tackling certain serious concerns on the environmental front. And when I say environmental front, please understand that it's all something about our lives also. It's not just environment sitting somewhere else. It's about our lives and the lives of 1 million species. So we worked on various sectors, and we worked mostly on largely on the ideas of how we as human species impact the environment and how less we can impact, or how better we can take care of it. So the work that we did was on, let's say, waste management. And waste is something that we profusely create and dump into the world, which otherwise no other animal does. I mean, we must understand that no other animal in the world dumps waste like we do. We're the only ones doing that. It's a very strange thing. How? Because we have a brain, and the rest of them don't have a brain. It's a very interesting thing, because they were given lesser brain than we were given a better brain to actually think through what we call wisdom. And then the end point of wisdom is we dump. So we better be, we better understand that. So we worked on what is called the zero waste idea, which is a cyclic idea. It's something that fits into the circular economy process, which means that you first of all don't design things which can create waste. The whole idea of waste itself, is that I extract products, I use it, I produce something out of it, I use it and I throw it off. Now we need to make it circular like any other species and see that we extract and produce and use products, only those products that can be cycled back into the product, which means you talk about recycling, we're talking about cyclicity of any producing mechanism or any manufacturing system. So that's a very long-term process, but we worked on a number of short-term goals with that. So this whole cyclic economy, or what we call circular economy, is something that we have to be very serious about. And zero waste is a great idea in that. The second thing that we worked on was agriculture, which I talked about, Savory's campaign, but we also worked on organic farming to bring back natural farming and organic farming so that we don't destroy the earth. We don't poison the earth for us to feed ourselves. In the process, we're also poisoning ourselves. So that is a correction that we have worked on intensively. And the third important area that we worked on was what we call living ecosystems, which means that, let's say a paddy land or a forest, the Western Ghats, for example, is a huge ecosystem. Now, if you ask me what is the lifeline of Kerala, let me tell you, the high-speed rail track or an airport or a Vizhinjam port is not the lifeline of Kerala. The lifeline of Kerala is the Western Ghats. You remove the Western Ghats and you're finished. But we don't understand that. And hence, that protection of the Western Ghats itself becomes a very important thing as a living entity. So living ecosystems becomes a very important, work for us. Now, coming to the question that you asked, how do you work in this? What are the thoughts that work on this? Let me tell you, the conservation is a very, very important idea that we have to talk about. One. The second big thing is that we are not just doing this for humanity. We are doing it for a lot of other life systems which have to survive if we have to survive. So there is a connectivity question. We are all connected. Ultimately, we all are also open source, software people, and Ubuntu, you understand what Ubuntu means. Ubuntu is such a beautiful word. Ubuntu actually means you are and so I am, or I am and so you are. It's like interconnectivity. We all exist because we all exist, kind of. If one of you is removed, then I don't exist, kind of. So that whole question of not independence, but dependence. The whole question of not being disconnected, but connected. The whole question of cooperativeness is the fundamental idea that can save this world. And we see it in the COVID times. It's a time when we all have to stand together. Why am I putting a mask? To protect you. I'm not putting a mask to protect me. I'm putting a mask to protect you, kind of. So that is, this whole collectiveness have to come back to the question. The other thing that we have to look at is humanity itself has made huge mistakes over the time, whether it be massive industrialization, such levels of extraction, petroleum. Now, when you compare petroleum versus solar, what will you say? Where will you stand? Solar. We'll say, no, solar is the idea. Why don't we say petrol is the idea? Because that's an old idea. We have to move out of the petrol industry. We have to move into the more, circular industry, circular systems, which is solar, which is wind, which is reusing of water, which is minimizing energy. So there is a whole lot of ideas and thinking that we have to bring in. And I will, at this point, say that again in this, let me tell you, engineers have a huge role. It's a massive role. Unfortunately, what happens is our syllabus still sticks to certain very conventional, what we have been learning kind of systems, and we are not looking at the larger crisis that this earth is, which is also an opportunity. See, this crisis that we are facing, climate change, is an opportunity for as many engineers to start working on sustainable systems. Unfortunately, in our syllabus, we are only taught sustainable engineering in one subject in the first year. And that itself is a very, very weak syllabus. I think it's a 4-year, throughout the syllabus orientation that we need as far as sustainability and climate change is concerned. So this is the fundamental systemic idea and thinking that we have to bring into our approach. And I would say very, very clearly that there are too many engineers now in the world. They either work on sustainability or they are lost, or they will probably destroy the earth worse. So we better be very careful that we are a very responsible society, and we need to, work on that. Yeah.
Yes, it's like they say, the harder you work, the better the outcome. So moving on to the next question. It is the young bloods through which you see the world. According to you, how are youth involved with Thanal Trust and Save Our Rice project?
Good question. See, I think most of the questions I'm not even answering for Thanal Trust and Save Our Rice campaign, but I'll use that experience to be able to say some things. See, when we started off together in Thanal as an organization, and I told you the areas that we were working, we were very young at that time. And that mattered. That mattered because even at that time, there were people who mentored us into this process. I mean, I was a normal engineer. I wasn't even thinking about all these things. The only characteristics that I had was justice. And you're pursuing justice. But then at some point, you realize that there is bigger questions than just justice. Then you see that a number of people mentored us into this. We had questions and they had answers. We built relationships with people within the organization, outside the organization, and finally we are here. Now as you can see, we are also getting old now. And Thanal right now has opened up its doors to a number of young people. And I must say that people like me now do very little work within the administrative and programmatic framework of Thanal. And it's the young people who are doing everything. All the teams are literally led by, much younger people than us. And we have a team of young people who have now moved into that. As far as the Save Our Rice campaign is concerned, it was one that worked for the farmers, with the farmers, and with a larger community. And there, one of the things that we were very, very clear about is that, farming, most of them are old people nowadays. But fortunately, after 15, 20 years of not our work, but a large number of people's work in agriculture has become prospective. So there's a lot of young people who are now dumping their jobs, let's say, even in America, and coming back to India and settling in some farmhouse and doing agriculture. There's a lot of people who are doing that. A number of people keep calling us and saying that we want to discuss with you agriculture. And we say, we'll open it up. And then we'll say that I'm so-and-so from America, or say, let's say England, we want to come back. What's the prospect for agriculture? And they come back and they do it. So there are a lot of young people who are now getting into agriculture. But I must say that that's something which is probably a message that I would like to share, is that, see, we are people who have gone through both the good side of the world. When we were very young, the world was very different. Our forefathers were much, much different. But then we did not have the technology that we have right now. I mean, like what we do right now, communication and all that, we never had that. Fortunately, now we have that. Let's not say that, this technology is bad and all that. That's not the idea. The idea is, fortunately, we have this now. But then we also have a greater responsibility as young people to be able to look at how do we make this world as beautiful, as sustainable, as green, and as thriving and living as possible, for us to be able to live with it happily. Now, that is a challenge I think youngsters have to take. So it's a double, edged sword kind of. On one side, we will have to continue to work on certain technologies. Some of them are very bad. Let me tell you, we should not have polluting technologies. We should not have water denuding technologies. No, you can't do that. So for those, we will have to work on sustainable solutions. We cannot have, energy killing technologies. But at the same time, on the other side of the sword, we'll have to also look at how do we work to make our food productions better, sustainable, help the farmers, help agroecology. You see a tiger, we have to look at, no, I'll make a road through the tiger path. That's not the way. We have to look at how do I go away and do a different road or a different path or a track but leave the space for the tigers, the elephants, the big animals, the forests, the tribals. That's something which we have to be very, very concerned about. So this challenge, I think, is a challenge for the youth. It's unlike the bucket challenge and all that. It's not a 1 minute challenge. It's a long-term challenge. You have to just jump into it. And let me tell you, when you jump into it, you become a social entrepreneur. You work on it. And what you deliver at the end of the day, let me tell you, is what is going to make this world meaningful for all of us. That is very important. And I would again come back and say, engineers have a great role in this. I see a lot of engineers coming in, and that's why I would say that engineers have a great role in it. And I also want to add one last thing in that. Of late, I have stopped literally talking to older people, let me tell you. I generally don't want to talk to people above 45, 50, but I talk to a lot of youngsters. In fact, before COVID, I had started off my sort of, just doing sessions for engineering colleges and other colleges as well. But unfortunately, COVID came and that had to stop. But online, we try and do that. My point is this, that engineers need to understand ecology much better. We are not taught sustainability. And then be able to fit our logical thinking and systems designing into that process. We'll make wonders. And that is the space that I am trying to, see. Because in terms of actions and work, I don't see much of a role for us anymore. I shouldn't be the one doing social enterprises nowadays. It's you who have to do social enterprises. The younger people who have to do social enterprising and all that. So I try and pitch in some sort of mentoring and try and see where we can help. I relegate myself to that role, but I think the youth have to take over.
Well, almost all our viewers are in the youth category, that too engineers. So your message will be received loud and clear. So moving on to our next question.
Hopefully.
Yes. What are the legal formalities or procedures that you had gone through as a social entrepreneur? And what are the different aspects that a budding mind should look for?
See, I'll start with sort of saying that I was not just a social entrepreneur, because that was a sort of the end point of my work. When I started off as in engineering colleges, I was actually given the role of helping build up some of the colleges. So whether it be a couple of colleges and all that, I was in that critical role of in a team or sometimes leading the team to set up the college. So at a very young age, I was put in that job. But when I left my job and went into voluntary work, I must say, there was a whole lot of things that we did. And as I told you earlier, we had to do research, we had to fight, we had to go on the streets to struggle. But at the end of the day, we also had to do farming, invigorate and motivate people to do farming and bring them into collectives. But of late, we have also been working closely to build up social enterprises. So one of them in Thanal, we at one point, we decided that we also have to get into the marketing of organic produce, but a much more sustainable and a much more alternate method of marketing. So cutting the long story short, we ended up building a literal social enterprise called Organic Bazaar in Thanal, which is one of the most pure organics that you get in Kerala, because we ensure through the process that it's completely safe, and it's been proven with studies and all that. So that is one model enterprise that we helped build, and I was part of the team that could do that. Similarly, we also worked on zero waste, and we had a zero waste center, which also worked for some time, but then there was such a lot of other things that got triggered out of it that we sort of shut that down. And we're working on more of a decentralized mode now. Of late, one of the enterprises that we also worked on was bringing farmers together into a collective. We had a great team in Wayanad, and as part of the conservation work, then a few farmers collective came together and said, we're doing organic indigenous rice. And now that is a big collective, and I've been associating with them to sort of, they see me as somebody who can put in a lot of systemic thinking and ideas into the work. It's called the Tirunelli Agri Producer Company. It's a producer company, farmer producer company, literal enterprise, and it's doing great. It's in the 4th year and it's doing great in Wayanad. So if you really want organic, indigenous, Nadan indigenous rice, then you can get to Tirunelli Agri Producer Company, or you can come into the Organic Bazaar. And so we have a few of these things set up. But now to the question that you are saying, see, all of these are different activities. So if you are going on a struggle to fight something, fight bad industry, let's say we fought the Mavur Gwalior Iron's factory, when we were doing that, then the legalities are very different. You have to understand a number of legal provisions in the country. So first of all, we should realize that we are in a country, a very sovereign nation, and it has its constitution and it has its laws. So none of the actions that we have taken over our work can be termed anti-national. It's all within the national framework, within the constitutional framework, and we have all the freedom. That's a wonderful part of this democratic country. We have all the freedom within this framework to be able to do very positive work, like building up institutions and But in all these things, one of the things is that you will have red tape issues. You will have issues where people will say no. I mean, throughout our lives, we have not been able to. We never had to pay through anything. There was no corruption involved. But because we always went straight to them and said that this is a concern that collectives have. It's a huge concern that we have to solve for the farmers. You help us. And we always found governments coming in, being with us in some sense. So it's the intent that matters. The law is there for all of us. And when there is something wrong with the law, let me see, and there are wrong things in the law. Recently, the environmental impact assessment notification is being modified by the government. It's a very bad thing to do. We are fighting it. But how are we fighting it? We are petitioning it. We are doing Twitter actions. We are doing Facebook actions. We are doing all sorts of things to tell the government that you're wrong. So that also we do. But everything as much as possible within the legal framework, and India gives us a lot of legal framework to that. As far as social enterprise building is concerned, it's all very clearly under the law. You have a Societies Act, you have a Trust Act, you have a Companies Act. So within that, there is enough provisions to do all of this. And let me also tell you that of late, governments are very, very proactive, most governments, in talking about social enterprises. So if as youngsters, you really don't want to be slavering under somebody, I would say get out and start building your own institutions. And to look at sustainability aspect, people like us are there. To look at even financials and investments, let me say my batchmates, even CET alumni itself is such a very strong alumni. The engineers alumni are very strong alumni. They are on the top of the world right now in terms of running enterprises. Many of them have such a good mind in coming back and telling you what to do and what not to do. It's just that you have to take the effort to move out and start doing it, rather than look for a company to just sit and work and get your pay. Think beyond it is what I would say. And the legalities are always with you. There's nothing wrong with the law. You can work through it.
Okay. So with this, we come to our last question. How significant is your work for the future, and what will be the message that you want to spread based on your life and work?
See, it's a tough question. I'll tell you. I mean, I don't see. I always try and answer this question to myself, because I find that when I say a message to the future or to the youth, it's also a message to oneself, to take us forward. See, I think one of the most important things that we all need to understand, especially as engineers, is that, and I said it earlier also, is that we cannot go and do any kind of intervention, whether it be engineering or transformational or whatever, in any place without understanding what exists there, who lives there, what is the ecology of the place, what is the hydrology, what is the space like. And that is why I think we should understand that we are a very responsible set of people who are part of a Earth which has millions and millions of species. So we have to understand that we are just one among a billion species, and because we have the wisdom and we have the skills for building, engineering, planning, training, thinking, we have to be much more responsible to all these species and to ourselves, and largely to the Earth. In the last 200, 300 years of industrialization, and when I say industrialization, let's understand that engineers were involved. Clear. More than anybody else, engineers were involved in some level of activity. We messed it up. We completely messed it up. Whether it be climate change right now, or whether it be large scale, destroying of Amazon forests, or whether it be, whatever destruction that you're talking about, somewhere our machinations were involved. If we have to get out of it, and at the end of the day, we as engineers also have to survive, we need to really understand ecology. So I will say that take the books, start reading ecology, walk into ecosystems, walk into forests, walk into places that you see greenery, and try and understand how that works, how the interconnectedness work. That is the first thing that I will talk to as engineers and as people. The second very important thing I would say is build relationships. The moment you build relationships with as many people, don't think that you're going to be in isolation and I'm going to make the money. The basic idea is we have all been taught to be independent, not free, but independent. The world is not independent. The world is dependent. It runs on dependencies. It runs on connectiveness. It runs on cooperativeness. So just look at that. Make that part of your life. And you'll understand that it's a very different world. You exist because I exist, or other way around. I exist because you exist. I am there and so you are there, kind of. So that interconnectedness have to be brought back into society. I think the rest of the things will follow if we understand these, fundamentals. It's just that we have to play a very, very much more responsible role than all of us played, because when we were there, we did not understand the world like this. We did not think that Earth had a climate problem. Now, your generation actually have to understand that the Earth has a climate problem, and that is your number one problem which you need to resolve. You have a role there. We have a lesser role there. We are done. It's you have to take over. That's all.
Okay, thank you, sir. It was such an amazing interview. And thank you, Sridhar sir, for taking your time and joining us today. The unexplored side of social entrepreneurship and feeling to be an environmental activist has been explained to us in such a simple yet precise manner. And I'm pretty sure that everyone who has been watching this interview has learned a lot from it. I'd like to take this time to express my gratitude on behalf of PIE and IEEE Kerala section. Thank you, sir, once again.
Anytime. Thank you.
Yes. This is Hannah signing off. Thank you for watching.